Listeners, welcome to the first of our 5-part series on having an abundant social life. In this episode, we're going to get into the science and soul of friendship and a lot of just what is a friend, why are friends important, what are the problems in the world if we don't have friends, and really just a great way to kick off this series.
Hi, I'm Dr. John Oberg, and joining me as always, Randy Lorensen, my co-host, and serial entrepreneur and frequent guest, Anthony Marino. Gents, welcome. Today, we're going to dive right into the first of a 5-part or more series on friendship and how to have an abundant social life. And today, we're going to dive into kind of the basics, some of the science behind friendship, but really the fundamentals of friendship that people don't talk about that often. Excited to dive in and talk about not just the science that I'm excited about, but also about like why friendship happens, how friendship happens, and we'll go through a whole series of things. I'm excited about the topic.
Yeah, let's jump in. Before we get too into the science, Anthony, John, what is a friend? Let's just talk about what it is. I mean, everybody talks about having friends, but I don't think it means the same thing to everybody. So what does a friend mean to you?
I know you've got a pretty strong definition. Do you want to go first or second?
I just think there's a huge chasm between friendships and a friend. Many, many years ago, my dad said that if you can go through your life and at any given time count 5 people on one hand that you can call true friends, you're a lucky man. And that has always stuck with me. And those 5 have varied over time, but those are people that would give you their last dollar. They're there for you before you even know you need them, and they're just there for you all the time. They're people you can count on. And friendships, they come and go. They're important and critically important to have a great social life. But there's just to me, there's a humongous difference between a friend and friendship.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same camp in terms of like, the 5 people you spend the most time with or the 5 closest friends you have. The nuance for me is that I wanted to have lots of friends at one point in my adult life. And I had, for reasons we can get into later today, a pretty skewed relationship with people broadly due to some of my own kind of shortcomings as a human. And after hours of therapy, one of the things I learned was that you can have different layers of friendship. Like there are people, it's like an onion. There's the 5 people Anthony talks about that you're closest with. And then I think there's other layers of friendship that maybe have less intensity, less closeness, that kind of, there's a spectrum between deep, true friends that are those 5 we just talked about, and then acquaintances. And there's a whole spectrum of layers in between that people can come in and out of. And sometimes you find that person that belongs right in the center 5, and sometimes people don't get there at all, and so I think the answer is it kind of depends on season of life, where you are in the friendship relationship, and then like Anthony said, people come in and out of your life for sure.
Yeah, and there's definitely different levels, and we're going to explore all of that during this series, right? And how to, throughout the series, we're going to talk about, how to find better friends, how to be a better friend, and everything in between. So let's jump in, John. Let's put the doctor hat on for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Let's get into the biology, the science of belonging and friends, and let's start there.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to hold myself out to be an expert on the biology of things kind of deeply, but on the science part, I shared with the 2 of you an article on isolation today, and isolation's been a topic a lot. I'm just looking it up right now to see if I can find the actual article title for people that want to see it. The Hidden Costs of Men's Social Isolation out of Scientific American. And this is like the same topic that the Surgeon General has said, that isolation is the number 1 kind of health crisis in America today. And it's true. I looked for the numbers and couldn't find their source, but had a therapist tell me years ago that men had 12 people they could talk to about anything in the 1950s and 60s, and that number is now less than 3. I found the less than 3 number in several scientific articles from the mid 90s up and through the teen years. And when you have that few people you can talk to about anything, you have less of a social net. And I think that a lot of the mental health crisis today that is tragic, I think there are a lot of those things that can be rooted back to a breakdown of the social fabric and friendships and isolation. And I think friendship's a part of that. I don't think it's the whole solution, but I do think it's an important part of what we need as a social creature. You can go back and look at the sociology of how we lived together 20,000 years ago, and you saw villages of 150 people that broke into smaller groups, and so these social constructs for humans, like, we are a communal animal. We're not designed to live alone, and so I think that's where we're starting this conversation. Is we have to understand that relationships as we have them are an important part of how we're designed as an animal, and we're to cooperate with one another. So
yeah. I was thinking when Anthony was talking about his dad and the 5, if you have 5, that you're really fortunate, and I think that's true. And I do think, especially today, I don't think most people have 5 people that they can reach out to today, which the science talks about. The other thing that jumped out to me when you said that is, even in prison, right? Like, the worst thing they can do to people is put them in isolation.
Yeah, solitary confinement, right?
And that even there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we definitely are social creatures.
Couple of books we'll link to. Tribe is a great one by Junger, and then there was Yuval wrote one that we'll put on the website as well. That the name is Sapiens, which I thought was just kind of a brief history of sociology, and friendship isn't like the key topic of those books, but if you want to kind of understand the sociology from like a real brief, just kind of single book, Tribe is the shorter one, Sapiens is the longer one. I think they're both worth reading.
Okay. What happens? I mean, why is that, right? Like, so let's talk about that. Like, what happens in our brains, or what happens physiologically that makes even an inmate dread isolation more than anything? Why is friendship so important?
Yeah, I mean, again, the biology part I'm going to be guessing on, but I think we probably have some type of chemical reaction that happens as a result of kind of getting experiences of pleasure related to community. And that's one part of it. I think the other part of it too is that, if you even go back just a few hundred years, we depended on one another just for things like hunting and gathering, where, one part of the community would hunt while others gathered. And it was just working together to do something as simple as getting food onto the table. And if you look kind of like at probably a more recent, agricultural society, let's call it the 1800s, you still had families of people that had to work in concert. You had, people having 5, 7, 10, 12 kids. And many of those kids wouldn't survive, till 18. So you had a different thing happening there. But a level of just dependency from kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like getting food and shelter taken care of. So I think, we don't have those same challenges in the same way today. And so I think that maybe big underscore, maybe might have a role to play.
Yeah. It seems to me that it's in our DNA. I've heard, I don't know if anybody knows this for sure, but I've heard numerous times that in our DNA that people used to be ostracized from a community or kicked out of a community if they didn't do things, and so that somewhere that has been in our subconscious or in our DNA, even though that's not really what happens so much today. But people still get kicked out of societies or groups. So let's talk about building blocks of relationships, of friendships. Anthony, when you think about friends, what do you think about? Like, what are those building blocks, or what qualities are you thinking?
Do I want to be here? Do I want to spend time in this space? Historically, I found that you join disparate groups for disparate reasons. You have the gang that you go to the football game with. You have the neighborhood social dinner party network. And then within that, you have a closer or less close bond with certain people in that group. And over time, you foster a closeness with the person or persons you feel most joy from. I really, really think joy is a underused thought. I really enjoy being in this space at this time with this person, whether it's a spouse, a girlfriend, a group of folks that you're playing poker with in your case. So I think those are the building blocks for me. If that's not there, It's like a foundation. It doesn't exist. You can't get there without that sense of joy with that person.
And I think that's I guess would you agree with this? I'm just thinking that's especially true for acquaintances, or I think earlier you called them different levels of, what did you call them? You said friends and real friend, or friend. What did you call them? You had two.
They were acquaintances.
Yeah, but acquaintances, right? Like I'm just thinking, I've had a lot of acquaintances over the years where we play together, we have fun, we do things, and you enjoy being around that person. And that there's a big difference between that and the real friends that you were talking about, those 5 key friends you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and those 5 the 5 friends, they may be the people you spend the least amount of time with.
Yeah.
You just know they're there. We've all had mentors. I still have a mentor that I can turn to. He's a lot older now, but just like I am. But nonetheless, I don't see him often. I only talk to him on the phone. I've visited him probably 5 times in the last 10 years, but he's the closest friend I have. So acquaintances, friendships, that you might see him every weekend.
Right.
Your golf buddies, they're good guys. I love being with them on Saturday.
Right.
At 9:00.
Right. But that's not the person you're going to call on when the chips are down.
No.
Yeah. Right. So that's different. And we'll explore that throughout, throughout this series. We'll go deeper down that. John, talk about, I know you've got your building blocks for relationships. You want to dig into those?
Yeah, when we talk about relationships, personal and professional, I think the foundation of all that is like an ability of responsibility and accountability. And that's just like being able to show up and do what you say you're going to do. It's really hard, not impossible, but it's hard to have like the kind of depth of relationship we're talking about if someone is not going to do what they say they're going to do, and if they're accountable to their actions. Like that, it becomes more difficult. Not impossible, but more difficult. And I've heard people talk about this at length. Those are the building blocks that you put under the house, so to speak. And then from that, you've got 4 skills in a relationship that generally are, well, more often than not, I see them as being unconscious with people. But for people like me who needed to be conscious about them, I had to actually develop this skill set. And so one of those is about acceptance of being different than somebody else, like accepting that someone else has a different point of view than yourself. One is about trustworthiness. So when someone shares something with you, that you can actually hold that in confidence. People don't think you're going to spill their secrets. The next one is seeing other people in their best light, like just assuming best intent. It's hard to have great relationships if you always assume the worst. And then the last one is, vulnerability, like the depth of vulnerability. And there's lots of layers of vulnerability that we can talk about. I think Matthew Kelly has a book about romantic relationships, the 7 levels of intimacy, that lay it out fairly well for not just romantic relationships, but the first 6 levels are appropriate for kind of any relationship. And he talks about that first level of relationship is cliche, where you might bump into someone at a social party and he'd talk to Anthony about like the weather today, right? Like there's not a whole lot of risk in that for either person. And if you want to go into deeper vulnerability, you get into like sharing facts, and facts might be about like, yesterday's golf score, then you get into like opinions, and this is where you start to take like emotional risks in a relationship, because once you share an opinion, you risk judgment. And if people aren't accepting of you, that, and then the next layer of vulnerability is when you start to share your hopes and dreams, because now it's not just your opinions, it's things that are really meaningful and important to you. Past that, you get into feelings. And we could have a whole episode on the appropriateness of when and where and how to share feelings. But, when people are sharing feelings in a functional, healthy way, that's a deeper level of relationship. There's a functional and dysfunctional way to do that in my experience. And then you go on into like faults, fears, and failures. And now you're really super vulnerable because you're exposing the chinks in your armor and the soft spots. And so, and then there's a level that is, generally reserved for romantic relationships, one-to-one, that's about kind of a central need to the human being. Those are things that are often sexual in nature, or romantically intimate in ways that would be appropriate, and for a husband and a wife as an example. And so that's a layer of intimacy that is generally reserved for, again, generally one person.
Okay. A lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So we could probably do a whole episode on each one of these, and listeners, we're not going to. So I just want to, I want to go back through and kind of discuss these in small chunks. Yeah, not yet. Let's just take the first two put together: accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
Anthony, you talked about different types of friends. So talk about how those two things apply to that different group of friends, those two different groups of friends.
Well, in terms of accountability, I look at that from the perspective almost tied to truthfulness. The person, the friend, if you will, is part of your existence, and you can ask them anything, gonna get a straight answer. They're not pulling punches. I remember one time the person I was speaking with, something was going on in my life, and he said, why don't you get on a plane tomorrow and come on down and see me, Marco Island. I'm thinking, I'm living in California. I'm not getting on a plane tomorrow. And I said, Jim, no, that's crazy. He said, no, you need to get here. And I'm going to help you. So the next day, I got on a ridiculously priced flight, overnight flight, like 3 stops, and got to Marco Island, Florida. And sure as shit, Jim helped me. So that's what I see in accountability. And he took responsibility for my problem. He's going to solve it. He's going to help.
Yeah.
He's going to do something. May not have worked, but he was going to do something. And that, to me, that's kind of where that chasm starts. Versus you need a job, or you need a good lawyer for a reason, and someone says, yeah, I'll get your name. And maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. That's the difference to me.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
I mean, that happened this morning, Randy. I was supposed to do a meeting, and I had an email about the meeting. I had a reminder. It didn't get onto my calendar, and it would have been really easy for me to blame my administrative team or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's my responsibility. And so at the end of the meeting, I was late. I did show up to the meeting, but I was there for part of it. And at the end, I said, hey, by the way, I know I said that it wasn't on my calendar at the beginning of the meeting. During the meeting, I checked to find out why, and I recognized that you did all the things you were supposed to do. I missed on my side. Apologies again for wasting your time at the beginning of the meeting. Won't happen again, to the best of my ability. And I wanted you to know but the fault was on my side. Okay. And I wanted them to all hear that in that public setting because, I showed up late.
Yeah.
And that's, somebody who knows me was like, hey, that's not you. Like, that's not normal. It's like, I know. And I wanted to make sure they knew, like, I own that one because had it been you, I would have held you accountable,
right.
But it was me, and it was clearly me. And so publicly I put my hat in my hand, and I wanted to just say, like, sorry about that. There was a time in my career I might have made an excuse or tried to pawn it off on somebody else to look good.
Yeah, that's something we'll talk about in a future episode is taking feedback. But, one of the things I recognize in both of you is both of you are willing and able and emotionally mature enough to take feedback and learn from it. Not everybody is, right? But I think my takeaway from that is that the accountability and the responsibility really applies to those real friends, the ones you can count on when the chips are down.
I think it matters for relationships professionally too. I think that in professional relationships, and if you're assessing someone's not accountable or responsible to some level, being aware and accepting that person where they are, if they're, it could be a coworker or a boss you don't have, managerial authority over. And so accepting that kind of as the landscape for it is so you can navigate it more effectively with less frustration is really, really important.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's a great point. So I think on the other hand, I have a lot of friends, acquaintances, whatever you want to call them, that they're not very responsible. They're not very accountable. Right. And I still have people that I have relationships with, but I have different expectations. Was that true for you guys, or am I kind of unique in that?
I'm not sure I'm following your line of thought.
I don't want to use names. I got a friend who, great guy. We get together. We can have lunch. We can go do things. We have fun. We've been on trips together, but he may or may not show up to shit, right? And if you're supposed to be there at 7, you probably won't be there at 7. You'll probably be there at 7:30. This is going to get to what we're going to get to, I think, acceptance and seeing people in the best light. When I was younger, I had more trouble with that, right? Like I probably would have cut those people off more. But I've got people now that I wouldn't consider them super responsible or accountable. They're friends. They're probably not the people I'm ever going to count on when the chips are down, though.
Yeah. So back to the definition of friends. They're people in your life who you enjoy being with and tolerate their lack of timeliness or selfishness.
Yeah.
I bumped into somebody who was an artist once, and I recognized that I wasn't going to have that type of relationship because they had my words that I used initially were flaky and a whole bunch of really judgmental words. And then some people in the mental health world kind of called me on that. And they're like, hey, those are your words and your judgments, but how about they value things differently than you value them? I was like, oh, damn, like that's unfortunately very accurate. And my view was very tainted by my own desire to make myself feel good and normalize my value system versus their value system. And so I think, good friends often share common values, often share common goals, often share, a common path for a period. And so sometimes it's about responsibility and accountability the way that you and I might see it. Sometimes it's just about having similar values around those things, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't want someone leaving here thinking like if you're not highly accountable, high responsible, type A, whatever, you can't have. That's just not true. I've met people who have very, very different value systems than me. That have very close friends, whose friends would never be close with me, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a good transition into I'm gonna lump together in the things you went over, acceptance and seeing others in the best light.
Yeah.
Right. And is that it's something I'm probably a lot better at now than I was when I was younger. I mean, there's still certainly a judgmental side of me at times. I'm not gonna deny that that's there, but I think there was much more of one when I was younger. But do you guys have opinions on that? Challenges with that? How important do you think it is?
Well, I think it gets to what John was talking about just a minute ago, that in the case of the artist, his value set is different, but, understanding that and accepting that is okay. I mean, it creates the framework of a potential relationship, right? If you are just beside yourself because the person was late today, and you're not going to get past that, then one side of the house is going to be open, and the wind is going to come through and the rain, and it's going to cause trouble. So you've got to decide: am I going to have 4 sides to this home, and then am I going to let people in and give them a chance? That's the first step. That said, the person that's always late, that person I would cut out of my life, because they're showing a side of selfishness that I don't want to participate in. Selfishness is really something that leads to a lot of negative outcomes. When things get tough, when you need something or they need something, there's selfishness can lead to untruthfulness. There's a lot to unpack with that, and that's one of my big red flags when I see a selfish person.
See, I agree with that for the most part, Anthony, but there are times too where I know that person, I may play a role in their life or they may play one in my life. And so for a moment, if I can find alignment for a moment, then I may choose to walk along with that person for a moment and then recognize where it may not be functional or healthy for me anymore too, without judgment about like just, hey, we're not on the same path. Like we're just, our paths cross for a minute. We walk in parallel for a moment. In fact, I think the Japanese word for marriage is literally translated to something like walking along parallel paths. And, for a long period of time for marriage. But so I think I used to have the approach, I would just cut people out and replace them. And that was a very it was like, I didn't want to admit it, but it was, for me, it was, what can you do for me lately? For you, it sounds like you didn't want to waste your time getting so different.
No, you articulated it better than I did. But I didn't mean that if it happened once or twice, I was going to cut him out. It would get to a point where I'd cut him out is after talking to the person.
Yeah.
After, not confronting, but, pointing out that I'm seeing it this way. You want to try to salvage all your relationships so they can be salvaged. It's hard work. You're accountable for taking some effort to create the right environment. Sometimes people don't see themselves as 15 minutes late, it's no big deal.
Right.
Or, whatever they didn't do for you, in their mind, they didn't think it was going to have that kind of impact. So just like in a marriage, you've got to say, I recently was hours ago with a young couple, one side of a young couple, and man, this one side of this young couple was really dug in. They're not seeing the other side. And I said, Sir, you're not going to solve your problem, I don't think, unless you loosen up a little bit on seeing the other side of the argument here. So, so I agree with you. You got to give it some time. There are egregious things that we all know.
Well, I think, the three of us have been friends for a long time. We've been Anthony and I went through this, 3-4 years ago? I can't remember. It was a while ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty good example of like how it goes well.
Yeah.
I'll let you tell the story because you could tell better than me probably.
Well, John let me down. He wasn't up.
I knew you'd tell it the right way.
No, we had a misalignment of roles, and in my mind anyway. And I regressed and withdrew, and he confronted it with what's up, and I finally I was man enough to say it out loud, and we hashed it out.
But from your point of view, you had a frustration that when I stood in your shoes was so understandable. Even if I didn't share the perception, it was like, oh shit. Like from that point of view, I'd be pretty upset too.
Yeah, but I did the classic withdrawal. I'll just fix it myself. I'll just handle it. I'm just gonna, I don't want to stir it up, or I didn't really know what to say. I felt like I might hurt him if I pointed this out. And then I was also thinking, am I right? And so you go back and forth, and then you get busy, and you're running a business, and 2 weeks goes by, and you're more and more pissed 2 weeks down the road. So
my wife had a dream I did something wrong once and woke up angry at me. That's still a thing. We'll talk about that in another episode. No, but I think the great part. So here's the cool part, though. Like the cool part was we talked about it. Anthony was able to share, like, hey, here's my point of view. I was able to see it from your point of view, and then we said, okay, well, how do we get back to alignment? Because I don't think the gap is as big as we think it is. And I think it took a call. I don't think it took 2 calls.
No, we got there very, very quickly. I calmed down once it was on the table.
Yeah.
And then we were able to problem solve what the root cause issue was. It was a bunch of little things, but there was one particular thing, and I didn't remember what it's so far removed from my consciousness now. I didn't remember what it was, but I know there was one big thing. There was one big thing, and like in a good negotiation, you solve the big thing first, and then you can work on it. It's the biggest mistake people make. They try to solve all the little problems in their life. But the big thing, still there. You got to solve the big thing.
But I think, as I think about this, it really comes back to these things of acceptance, seeing people in their best light. And it's hard as humans, right? Yeah. Like as friends, as humans, because we get tied up in our own stuff, our own shit. And we're thinking about how it affects us. But in this case, without, I guess, knowing all the details, look, Anthony's thinking about, well, this is how I feel and this is how I take it. And John's thinking it. And versus once you got into each other's shoes and talked about it.
Well, somebody has to go first, right? And to Anthony's credit, he went first, right? And so I didn't know what was going on. And he went first and he shared what the problem was with vulnerability. I think I then responded with acceptance, like, oh, crap. And I took a minute. And my recollection is I said, okay, well, here's how I see it. And he did the same thing back then. He's like, oh, okay, well, that also makes sense. And then it was about picking a finish line that we both wanted and how do we both get there together, and we were then navigating the road, with the relationship in mind, with solving a problem, and we both wanted the same thing. And this is where relationships get sideways, is they, someone defends their position because they want to feel a certain way, or they want to avoid conflict, or, and we get hijacked. Right. And so in this case, we didn't allow each other to get hijacked because there was a deep level of care. And we had the benefit of having done this for 2 or 3 companies before that, working together. And so for me, I can't speak for Anthony, but getting through that moment for that thing, I think deepened trust for me, because I had a lot of confidence that no matter what at that point, we could navigate anything. Because it was hard. It was a hard moment. I don't know if that, yeah.
No, it was. And I don't want to make this a male-female thing, but I have to, I was trying to solve everything myself without talking to anybody, let alone the person I had the issue with. So I wasn't seeking counsel from other people. I was, in classic fashion, trying to just be a hero and handle it myself, or bury my head in the sand, which is something that happens way more often to men than women, because they tend to seek out community. Women seek community. They seek input. When they make a decision, they usually don't make it off the cuff. They usually have talked to a handful of people and got good advice and counsel, and then come around.
But I think tend to I think that's the key, right? Like this happens to men and women both. It happens, like it men ask for help, women, but I think that's, broad generalizations. That's right.
Yeah.
All right. And vulnerability, you guys have hit on vulnerability. I think there's a little too much to unpack on this episode. Maybe that even becomes a part 6, is digging into that someday. But listeners, we're going to go to break. We'll be back shortly. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the problems and why loneliness and friendship is an issue. All right, listeners, welcome back. As I mentioned, after the break, we're going to come back and talk about the problem, right? Because I think a lot of people feel they're alone in this.
Yep.
And God, I don't have enough friends, or I don't have good friends, or, and then leads to depression and a bunch of other stuff. But let's talk about why this has been happening. Anthony, John, and we talked about during the break a little bit, opinions.
Oh yeah.
You guys want to dig into that? Sharing opinions and people not feeling about it, and arguments and everything else that leads to it these days?
Opinions are the first real layer of vulnerability where people can be at risk. And that used to be probably a little bit less true in decades past. But today, if you have an opinion, there's a lot more energy put behind opinions. And a lot of people, we've had the cancel culture and all these types of things, and a lot more polarization in society around a lot of things. A lot of politicization of things that wouldn't have been politicized more historically. And I don't, it makes opinions more dangerous to share. Right. And then people, Anthony, I don't know what your experience has been. My experience has been that when you don't share an opinion with somebody, those people could have been, dinner acquaintances and even good friends in decades past. And that's almost impossible today. And so, you've seen a shift in this too with opinions.
Oh, without a doubt. I'm older than these guys, and I grew up in you can't believe it, right? Just take a look at them. The 70s culture was a culture of discussion. We exited the 60s with a rough ride, with a lot of protests and so forth, strong opinions that actually created change in the world. And then there was constant discussion on campuses about where the world was going, the difference between capitalism, communism. We had a Cold War brewing with the Soviet Union. And there was just all kinds of discussion and open-mindedness to listen to the other side. And it wasn't what we have today, where it's opinions of one. Someone has an opinion, that's it, it's over, put it out on social media, and that's the answer. And there is just nasty dialogue. There's not a true dialogue of discussion and open-mindedness from a large part of the what you see. Now, what you don't see is the cocktail parties, the dinner parties, the afternoon at the bar, where I think it still exists. I think there's still more of it there. This social media situation is where you're just getting these black and white discussions, and makes people not want to share an opinion because they're going to get shot at.
When you say it's still there, though, compare the 70s to now.
Oh, well, there was a lot. We had different tools that we were using in the 70s.
Yeah. Different hammers and screwdrivers?
But not everybody was.
And there was, no, not everybody. And there was just I don't know, maybe the older you get, the better it was. You know, there could be some of that.
No, it was different.
Coming through. But there was just, there was just dialogue. And it didn't matter. There was no, we didn't have a right or left. There wasn't a right or left. It was, yeah, I generally think this, and how do you feel about that? And it was much calmer.
But the consequences have changed so much, right? And I can't speak to the 70s, but I'm just thinking the 80s. I remember being in college, and we would have discussions, and you would have heated debates with people. I remember this in my freshman dorm. You'd go in our house's study hall, and inevitably these debates would break up. And if there's 8 people in there, there might be 4 people on this side and 4 people on this side, and you'd debate. And if there were 7 people on one side and 1 on the other side, usually me, but like a couple of us would go join the person that was by themselves just to debate the other side. And when we got done, we were still friends, and we might be on different sides arguing with different people. And today, I feel like the consequences are a certain percentage. I don't know what that percentage is of society. Feels like you can't be friends now.
Back up to the part where you said you debate the other side. Like, there's a step that I think is missing. And so one of my kids, we were having a conversation about something that was going on in the Middle East. And so, he started by asking questions about one side, and then I forced him into questions about the other side. And there was a third side in this particular situation. So I then forced him into thinking about the uncomfortable third side. And it just...
What sides?
So this is about the October 7th thing that happened with the Palestinians and Hamas. And,
so Israel and Hamas.
And Gaza and Israel. Yeah. And so I said, what do you think it must have been like to be an Israeli on that day who was near, the border? And we had a long, we were on a 12-hour car ride home. We really had a 30 or 40-minute talk, and he was really empathetic to the plight. And I said, well, so tell me about what it would have been like to be kind of a non-combatant on the Gazan side. Like, what do you suppose that must have been like? And then it was like you could see the brain expanding. Like he had some really intelligent commentary. And I said, he's like, so you think one side or the other? I said, I'm not going to tell you what I think yet. Now I want you to think about what it must have been like to be someone who was so angry for so long that they wanted to kill people and be willing to, sacrifice their own life. Like, what must that have been like? And that's, in no way am I like saying that that's an acceptable form of behavior.
Right.
I don't believe that. But I think there's a lot we can do to be empathetic about different points of view before developing an opinion. And so what I shared with him was like, look, whatever opinion you have, I'm going to respect that opinion if you've already debated both sides of it passionately and successfully to a point where you can really, truly understand. And then you form your opinion. I'm going to respect the fact that you formed that opinion. You can have your opinion no matter what, but well-formed opinions are a thing. Yeah. And then you can decide if and how you want to share those opinions. And so for me, I find myself a lot of times, I used to have an opinion about everything. And then when I started listening more, I found myself getting a lot more educated on other people's points of view. And it helped me to, in some cases, change my opinion, in some cases, strengthen my opinion. But in some cases, I'm just quiet about it. And, but yeah, anyway, I think well-formed opinions are important. I think being able to see both sides is really, really important. And I think that step of like being able to argue both sides before you put your foot down on a side is probably helpful in most cases.
I think that's the biggest difference between today and yesterday is the opinions aren't well-formed, well-informed. And I'm not sure of the reason, but the outlet is I can just bang a few keys on my phone and tell everybody in my universe, my Twitterverse, my Facebookverse, my Instagramverse, what my opinion is. And someone's going to listen to me. And there's an excitement about someone listening to me. Never, the earth is flat. I can tell everybody. Well, buddy, have you taken a look up there? So because the outlet exists, and then it foments itself. Then someone else says, yeah, the earth is definitely flat. I know it. I saw a picture, and on it goes. And
this is, I think one of the things too is we use the word opinion where it isn't really appropriate. It's like, if someone assassinates another person's character, you're an a-hole. That's my opinion. Well, that's actually character assassination. And when it gets to the point of defaming someone or it's libelous or slander, like the mechanisms we have in place to protect for that today don't seem to fit the environment today. And so I'm saddened by people's willingness to jump to character assassination, which I find to be fairly dysfunctional, and then try to couch that as an opinion as a way of protecting that. And I don't. We've got to find a way as a society to make that not acceptable. Maybe from a regulatory perspective, that's not what I'm talking about, but like really letting people couch knowing untruths as opinions to protect free speech. I think that's a problem. I hope we can kind of regain our intellectual honesty around that.
But I'm going to keep going back to the consequences.
Yeah.
And what do people accept and what's okay, right? And I don't, again, we talked about during the break a little bit when it started, and we'll probably go down that path, but at some point, 70s, 80s, even 90s, I feel like you could have these discussions.
Yeah.
You could still be friends. People would have dinner. Families weren't splitting up over Thanksgiving dinner about the president. They might not agree, but they were still family. And now this is a very real thing. And Anthony mentioned social media. And so its role, I mean, I think most of us thought when the internet came out and social media, oh, what a great way to bring everybody together. But it hasn't done that. I think this is one of the big problems with creating friendship today.
It has brought people together in some ways. Like I'm keeping up with people from my high school that I never would have kept up with otherwise. So it's a mixed bag, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But how has it added to the problem, I guess is the better question I should be asking.
Yeah, the greatest analogy I've heard is when you see social media, you see someone's well-manicured front yard and you're not looking at the inside of the house or the backyard or the garage. And so, but if you don't know that and you then kind of take that to mean that the whole house is like that, the whole, and look, very rarely is someone's life their social media. Like I haven't met many people where those two things are the same. And so, and this is true of kind of advertising more broadly. There was a kind of a well-documented schism of psychologists in the 60s that left the world of clinical psychology and went into advertising to make more money. And there was a really big kind of ethical concern debate around that. Is it manipulation if you have that level of understanding of someone's psyche while you're advertising to them? And, and then are you dry? And so I think that is a similar kind of analog to people shotgunning their opinions, uninformed opinions, out into the world, and then they create these echo chambers.
Right.
And we have these technologies that create that echo chamber because what that creates is a person staying on that social media site longer, and more views means more impressions of ads, which is what they really want. And so it suits their economic benefit to keep you in that echo chamber because you keep coming back to view more ads. And I don't think they're like manipulative about that. I think the social media sites are pretty open about that. So there's no secret there.
Right. Well, and I think what you're talking about, the echo chamber, right? If we go to what Anthony said about, let's pick on the flat earther since he already started. I
hope it doesn't turn out to be true. That would be.
But in the 70s or 80s again, or whatever, in the, yesterday, I think you called it, was a good phrase. If you were a flat earther, I can't imagine anybody wouldn't have thought you were insane, which maybe that's a bad thing. I don't know. But if you said, hey, the earth's flat, people would have just laughed at you, and you would have still been friends, and they've been like, oh, look at crazy Anthony. He thinks the earth's flat. But you still coexisted in your neighborhood or your school or your work or wherever you were. Now you can go on social media and find 1 million people that agree with you.
Well, and yeah, I think we have to draw a distinction between like facts and opinions too, right? Like I think there's things that are scientifically acceptable. By definition, science moves itself forward and makes yesterday's information obsolete, and so we're in a growing body of knowledge. The frontier of knowledge moves, and so and then opinion is generally in a place where there may not be facts.
So take it away from flat Earth. Let's just say it's political, right?
Yeah,
and it could be what side of the aisle or
Sure.
some political issue.
Yeah.
The fact is, it used to be that if you were around the dinner table or in your community, you had people on both sides and you coexisted.
Yep. The level of acceptance has gone down.
Yeah, it seems like now you aren't forced to coexist, and you aren't forced. Like, I think it's weakened us mentally because we're not forced to consider the other opinions of people around us, because we are able to isolate.
There's a level
weird way with that group
there's
of
a level
people.
of independence we have, right, Randy? Like people are more able to be independent kind of economically and from kind of a Maslowian hierarchy of needs than ever before. Like if you look at like the poverty levels of today and how we live relative to others in history, I think, we say that people in the U.S. in poverty, most of them live better than any king or emperor for the last 2,000 years, save the ones that have lived in the last 100. And so there's this level of like maybe economic decadence on the one hand that's caused independence where we don't, and again, I'm supposing here, this is not my area of expertise, but this would be one thing I would hold out to be thought about would be like, is it true that because we're so successful from a Maslowian perspective, right, in the hierarchy of needs, that we are quicker to discount people?
Yeah.
Right. So like physical shelter and, food and, like those things. And we're all about self-actualization, which means we can just discard and transactionalize people, which is, that's a shame. Like relationship and transaction are about as, opposed as you can get.
Yeah, that makes me think of, we have a group text that we're in with a few other people. And when we were talking about the dire wolves, the one person in there was saying how he thought it was a good thing if there were dinosaurs and dire wolves running around eating people, because people would, basically his concept was it would be good for humanity because we'd have real problems to worry about instead of all the petty bullshit. I'm paraphrasing, but we would have real problems instead of all the petty bullshit that we worry about as humans.
There are people that think that, alien life and UFOs would do a whole really good job of like unifying the world. Yeah. Like the US was much less at odds with each other during the Cold War because we had a common enemy in the Eastern Bloc countries. And so, and right now there's no, global enemy. So there's some people that think we've turned in on ourselves to find internal enemies, and that, Independence Day with Will Smith and, that would be like a great scenario in the sense that we could all come to, and again, it's interesting, right? Like we're, yeah.
So, okay, we agree that not being able to have opinions and really express them has created part of this problem. We agree that social media has actually probably created more isolation and weaker things. I think the other thing we want to discuss here is remote work.
Yeah.
Like I think that has also isolated people. What are you guys' thoughts on remote work?
Well, it's a physical issue, right? You're not at the proverbial water cooler. You're not, on the fly communicating. Everything is pre-scheduled. You're not seeing the same. You're not feeling body language. You can feel body language when you're with somebody because you can see it. You can see the color of their face change if they're upset, their pursing of their lips, their posture, and so on and so forth. So there's a definite communication breakdown in that. And the stranger part to me is people love it. And there's this whole movement. I just read an article this morning about college graduates. Just in the last year, there is a tremendous increase in the number of college graduates that are seeking some sort of hybrid or remote job versus the 9 to 5. They think the 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, is meh.
Which, by the way, is so interesting because all of the Gallup polls in kind of recent years have said one of the most important things that people expect from their job is a best friend at work.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, those two things are just so, and they're both true, right? Like you miss the whole water cooler, you miss the shared experiences of, snacks, lunch, break, you miss so much of that. And then you have an expectation that your employer creates an environment for that. It's a very tough dichotomy for employers right now, for sure. And it's like remote work can do a lot to increase productivity in kind of one frame, but then you lose so much more in other ways too. And so, and I work with companies that are fully remote, and I work in companies that are not remote at all as a consultant. And it's a very different set of dynamics, but it's tough. And by the way, with one of the companies I work with that's remote only, we had to fire somebody because they were remote only 40 hours a week, and they were working for two companies in the same 40 hours.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, unfortunately fairly common.
Well, it's an opportunity cost, right? If let's just use 25% of the day, because everyone says no one's working 8 hours remotely. So just see 25% of your day is spent effectively alone, where yesterday that 25% created, you were with people face to face, and it created an opportunity to expand your social network, which could lead to a friend network or acquaintance network that could ultimately, perhaps, as you said, I got a best friend out of work. And if I think back on the people that are on my list, 3 of them were out of the business world. 2 of them I work side by side with. So what would I have made those people as friends? Would they be friends if I was working remotely in the 80s and 90s? I don't know. It's a good question.
I think this is where I think my encouragement to business owners is to teach these relationship skills we talked about, like responsibility and accountability is kind of the kind of table stakes for a company, and then having the skills of healthy debate, and we'll get into conflict in a different episode for relationship conflict.
And by teach them, of course, they would tell them to listen to the Tales of Abundance podcast and go to the Tales of Abundance website to get this information.
I'm not sure where else you could get it. Yeah, I mean, I think, in modeling it and being students of themselves, but most importantly, going to the website, watching absolutely. But look, these aren't skills that we came up with here. These are things that are ages old, long before I was alive, but I think it does take work. I think it's funny. We soft skills is an interesting term that came from a military kind of, I think, consulting agreement, and hard skills were things that had hard assets, ammunition and tanks, and soft skills were things that didn't. So finance initially was considered a soft skill. And so I think now, can you imagine someone talking about finance today as if it was a soft skill? I mean, these things that we call soft skills aren't actually soft skills. Like this is what makes the world go round. I think about how deals get done, and how, when I need help, I can call somebody. I had a child who was on the way to the emergency room the other day at a hospital where I know people there, and I called one of the senior executives. It was like, hey, my son's having a hard time breathing. And he's like, I'll call ahead. And when we got into the parking lot, they were waiting with open arms, and he got the most amazing service. And it was like the level of kind of comfort that gave, my family. Like these are relationship things. I wouldn't have felt comfortable calling that person at 9 o'clock at night had I not kind of walked arm in arm with them. And I would expect anybody in my friend group to call me anytime they need my help. Like that's, Yeah,
the other thing that we didn't plan on talking about, but I was just thinking, I also think COVID contributed to this, right? I mean, it kind of goes, that's where some of the remote work, social media, but that being abandoned, I know looking at my own kids, the oldest especially, like really, he was not happy during COVID. Like he is a very social being, and just being isolated. And, I think there's more and more data coming out now that lockdown in people.
Oh, there's huge data for the people, for the kids in school, all the way from K through 12. I haven't seen any data on colleges, although I'm sure it's similar if it exists, that it really, it's measurable, the impact it had. And by the way, in my own family, I can see that the rebound coming later. And so, but it's, look, the pandemic was this generation's kind of global incident.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy just in the last week or two who had two young kids. One of them was born early in COVID, and that first year or two where everybody's faces were covered all the time. And he's talking about the one that's 2 years younger, but they're like almost equally developed socially.
Yeah.
And because the younger one, and his take on it, whether this is right or not, but his take was that the older one, not everybody being covered in masks and not seeing facial expressions and all of that, basically slowed his growth and being able to just have social interaction and all that. So
body language is a huge part of how we communicate, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Randy, tell us what's coming up in the rest of the series.
Well, let's go to the why before we wrap things up here.
Sorry, jumping ahead.
Getting ahead. So, excuse me. The why. Why is this a problem?
Why is this a problem, or why are friendships important?
Well, both. I mean, it could be why are they important, and then so what? I mean, same question. Why is not having friendships a problem?
I think we go back to the top of the show, right? I mean, it's like without friendships, like we're a communal animal, right? Like we're designed to work in community with one another, and having isolation, we start life as dependent on our parents to eat. Like you literally can't eat on your own when you're born. And so you move from dependence to independence, and you gain that independence over a period of time and growth. And then you have the opportunity to move to interdependence. And so if you get stuck in that independence, you lose the opportunity for interdependence. And that interdependence is where the magic really is. And so I think that's the way that I would talk about it.
Yeah, like you say, it's a learned skill. We're products of our environment. So if your environment is I'm alone. I mean, I said it earlier during the break, and you guys are too young to remember this term, but starting in the 70s, there was, or maybe probably the late 60s, more and more two-income families started to permeate the universe here. And that created an output of that was latchkey kids. Latchkey kids were home alone. My son-in-law is a principal at an elementary school, and more than 3/4 of the kids are walking home alone or getting a ride from a grandma who drops them off at the house, and they're alone. So they became during the 70s and 80s, and we're creating more and more every day people that are used to being alone.
Well, and there's I mean, the sexual revolution of the 60s too had like a necessary and important positive changes for women in particular, being able to have independence. Like my mom couldn't get a credit card without a man co-signing her in the 1970s, which is just nuts to me. Couldn't get a mortgage without a husband co-signing. Like that's just bass backwards to me. But the unintended consequence of a pendulum is sometimes it overswings. Mm-hmm. And if you swing independence so far that you let go of, and you're trying to get rid of dependence, which is appropriate, but if you swing all the way to where you lose interdependence, I think that would be a huge part of I think what would, and then you've got to look at the Cold War ending and looking at how do we find the next enemy. Again, not my area of scientific research, but I'm super interested to think through what does that mean, and then my question is what can I do about it? And what I can do about it is usually inside my family, my friendships. How do I handle that?
Yeah, I'm nervous about it. I don't see our way out of where we are right now. So how do we best cope with this situation? How do we, evolve to a place where maybe our friends are virtual?
No, but young people are railing against some of the social media and some of this stuff. I mean, look at the fourth turning and the book that's written about the cycles we go through, and Dalio's book about the different, I think maybe this is going to be correcting itself because we're in a cycle that we've been in before. So I'm a little more hopeful than that. I think I'm worried, but I am hopeful that we've seen things like this before in a different way.
I think there's a billion-dollar business opportunity there somewhere. I don't know what it is, but
Yeah.
I would say there's big opportunity for somebody that wants to fix this. I think that's a good place to wrap up this first episode. In the next episode, listeners, we are going to be talking about how to cultivate these friendships and how to find your group of people.
Give us a quick teaser on the ones after that, too. I know we got some other cool topics coming after that.
Well, let me look ahead. So we have that, then we have maintain. So once you've found your people, we're going to talk about nurturing the bond, maintaining those friendships once you have them, and then friendships throughout time, right? Because you have friendships that are kids are very different than in adulthood, and some of those you maintain, and some of them rotate in and out, as Anthony was talking about earlier. So we'll talk about that and that drift, and then we're going to finish up with supporting your friends, navigating conflict. And we've had discussions. We may add some things to this from time to time as well, but those are the 5 that we'll be going over here in this initial series.
Love it.
Great. All right, Anthony, John, thank you. Listeners, thank you for listening. Again, please, wherever you listen to podcasts, go subscribe, download, give us 5 stars. That help us grow the podcast. Tell your friends about it, or just go to talesofabundance.com. And you can listen to the podcast there, or we have a plethora of free tools for you to check out.
Love it.